me, painting is about building. Painting is about creating something and investigating something and making your own visual environment. And that analogy with building is quite literal in this exhibition, because I'm literally observing the built environment and translating that into painting, and using those translated elements from buildings to rebuild and remake paintings. I'm interested in how paintings can communicate, how we bring with us, when we look at paintings, our own history of visual experiences, and then draw on those visual experiences to make sense of the painting in front of us. And I'm interested in trying to use that history of image experience in looking at paintings. I'm trying to use that knowledge to make a painting where it feels familiar, but you don't really know why. And I think that that's more important than making paintings that are overly didactic about what they're trying to say. There's a poetic element in not knowing. So the show is part of a much larger PhD project thinking about the role of translation in contemporary painting. Over the last few years I've just tried to refine that painting practice and focus on some different key parts of that practice. Having a studio at QCA is in an environment where there's so much different kinds of built imagery, so many shapes around, and I think that's really influenced my work. There are lots of shapes in my work that are reminiscent of the shapes out in South Bank, Brisbane landscape. Building shapes, architectural and advertising kinds of shapes. And in the studio, all those shapes combine in these paintings in a personalised way. So I guess the interesting thing for me is to figure out what I'm going to do with those shapes. It seems easy to observe shapes and observe interesting things around and transcribe them into the sketchbook. But the difficult thing is then, what do you do with those shapes? How do you create a painting? How do you use what's in your environment? How do you translate that into contemporary painting? So in the exhibition I've got two distinct bodies of work, colourful, multicoloured kinds of works, and I've got a bright green set of monochromatic works. And in between those works I've got a single black monochromatic painting, and that painting operates as a point through which these two bodies of works can communicate. Transitionary work operates as the end point of the colourful paintings and also a point of departure into bright monochromatic paintings. Really thinking about the process of painting and how painting's made. Thinking about the world out there and the shapes in the architecture and the shapes in the advertising, I'm immediately reminded of someone like Robert Venturi with his postmodern drawings of bits of buildings put together. So I'm immediately drawn to that postmodern eclecticism. And the thing that's interesting for me, though, the thing that seems missing that I'm trying to look at is how these postmodern drawings are not actually copies of the things from the real world, but how are they translations of those things? What are the personal inflections that are in those drawings that are highlighted in different iterations of those shapes? So these new works that I'm making are about trying to highlight that small personal element in interpreting those shapes. If I'm engaging engaging with a flat surface like a canvas or a flat surface like a screen, that engagement with that flat surface, how does that influence how I look at the world? Do I think about the world as another flat surface? So in thinking about the abstraction of that space, how can the arrangement of three-dimensional things when something is in front of something else, what is that space where they meet? The difference in the shape between the front image and the back image, and if you pull them apart, how do they exist independently out of context? So part of what I'm looking at with this exhibition is to think about how you can actually see into a painting. How can you reach into the painting, operate, create a painting that exposes its history and doesn't hide information behind layers of paint. Mostly oils on canvas. With oil paint, there is many different ways to apply paint as there are painters, and that's a really interesting thing actually. How do you work with oil paint in the studio? And I know many different artists working in completely different ways with oil paint. However, what I'm doing in the studio is replaying some experiences with commercial printing and incorporating some of that experience into the painting studio. For this exhibition, I'm working with oil paint in a bit of a different way because I am thinning it right out and using the oil paint as kind of like an ink, I guess, and spreading it on the surface like a veil. So I'm veiling shapes one over the other with oil paint to create a really rich, complex surface. What I'm technically doing with these paintings is glazing. Glazing requires that the surface be completely dry before the next surface is applied. So it's quite a time-consuming process, but I think really pays off in the end. So the green works I've been working on are collectively called composite orders, and what that refers to in art history is a mixed capital design where Corinthian and Ionic orders are combined and restructured to create a new order. So that restructuring and use of the word order is quite interesting and useful in the studio, where I can combine different elements in different orders in the paintings. And so that different order of arranging shapes in architecture and also in the studio in these new paintings is quite important because it indicates a process of one after the other, kind of an iterative process. So just like the mixing up of the different orders in the capital design in art history, in the studio these paintings are putting shapes together on the canvas in an order that, by using a translucent surface, that order is confused and that order is changed around and not clear. That's something that's quite interesting to me. I think that previously that order of constructing a painting would be from the start and via a step-by-step process until the painting is complete. And what I'm trying to do with these monochromatic paintings is to investigate that process a little bit. So there's not such a clearly defined process of start to finish, but an always here and now process where the painting can be entered into at any point. No elements in the work are lesser or more important than any other. There's a real democracy of these forms in the paintings. The artworks are really about paying homage to pre-existing shapes and using these shapes to revisit some of those shapes and make them my own. I guess by using abstraction, I'm trying to engage with a language of painting that is easy to understand and that is a good vehicle to express some of these ideas of translation in painting and how I can propel some things forward, how I can use shapes and use images and image shapes from my own experience, changing them, and I'm translating them into my own language of painting. The pop space, QCA postgraduate art space, has moved recently and it's quite a tricky space to install in. Part of the reason for my exhibition having two distinct bodies of work is that the space is actually quite distinct. It has quite a distinct separation between two parts of it, and I really am trying to create some large bodies of work that I haven't worked creating before. A really exciting space to work with.